Hey church family, it's Pastor Tim. I want to continue our series in Titus 2, 11 through 14. The Apostle Paul says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation to all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives in this present age, waiting for our blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ, who gave himself to redeem us from all lawlessness, and to purify for himself a people for his own possession, zealous for good works." Now in our last video, we talked about waiting on the return of Christ. And we wait because of what he's done for us, because of who he is to us. But we don't wait passively. And this is how Paul ends this passage. He says that we are waiting actively, that our waiting is a passionate enthusiasm for good works. Now, good works is Paul's shorthand when he speaks of an ethical life or a life in obedience to Christ, a righteous life. It's in contrast to how he opened this text, that the grace of God has redeemed us from worldly passions and unrighteousness, and that Christ has redeemed us from lawlessness. So doing good, or being excited or enthusiastic about good works, passionate for good works, is a contrast to what we were and to how the world lives. In short, Paul is saying that the grace of God trains us to live obediently to Christ, to no longer live for ourselves or to walk in lockstep with the world around us, but to walk in lockstep with Christ. In the opening part of Titus, Paul describes the people who are claiming to be followers of Christ but not obeying him. He says this, "To the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure, but both their minds and their consciences are defiled." Now note this, they profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. There are a number of people in the world today who might profess to know God and profess to be a follower of Jesus, but if their lives are not being conformed to obedience to Christ, then they have not truly received the grace of Christ, because the grace of Christ trains us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, godly lives today. We often think of good works as acts of mercy or acts of justice, and certainly those are part of it, but that's not the whole picture. Paul is talking about a life of righteousness, of how we treat others and how we live in submission and obedience to the Lord. It involves our business dealings and whether we act ethically. It involves school, whether students cheat on tests, whether they lie about their homework. It involves how we engage our own sexuality and live out faithfully the sexual ethic that God has given us in his word. And Paul's point is quite simple. The grace of God, once received, leads us to a righteous life. But it doesn't just lead us to a righteous life, it makes us eager, excited, passionate about obeying the Lord. Now here's the point that the Apostle Paul is making, and he tells Titus not to let anyone disregard him, that he is to do this work, to teach this doctrine, and to rebuke those who deny these truths. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you've received the grace of God, God is actively, through the Spirit of Christ, transforming you into his likeness, training you to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live in righteousness today. Now this is the great work of Christ in our lives, to transform us into his likeness, to be conformed to the image of Christ, and that's where we'll go next as we kind of wrap up a big picture in Romans 8, 28 through 30 of what God is up to in the world and in our lives. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you in the next video.